Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today on cutting costs with essential UC visibility. My name is Phil Corbin. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Verify. I'll be your host today. I'm also joined by Kevin Sweeney, Customer Success Manager, and Victor Verba, Systems Engineer here at Verify. Vic, Kev, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Phil. Just a little overview about myself. I've been with the company about 2.5 years now. Um, I've really enjoyed my time getting to talk to customers in this space and trying to find out, how we can help them streamline reporting and, cut down on some of their overhead costs. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Victor?
Yeah, and thanks for having me today, Phil. Kevin, my name is Victor Verba. I'm a systems engineer over here at Verify. I've been with Verify for going on 6 years now, and I've been doing in the telecom analytics space for well over 20 years. So I'm pretty familiar with the UC platforms as well as most of the other phone systems that have come and gone.
Awesome. Thank you, Vic. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. If you are not familiar with us, we provide analytics and management solutions for the UC space. That includes Cisco, WebEx calling, Microsoft Teams, Zoom Phone. We're not going to get into much detail on that today, but if you're interested in learning more, please check us out at verify.com. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss the impact of resource optimization or lack of, how you can optimize your resources with some basic UC visibility. We'll also discuss some real-world outcomes of this optimization and get some expert insight from Victor about what they're seeing in a technical standpoint. At the end, we're going to answer any questions during our Q&A before giving out some Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to the very end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin for the first use case. Kevin, take it away.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so as Phil had kind of mentioned, today's webinar is kind of about shedding light on how both small and large telecom environments can achieve benefits from optimizing their resources. Uh, it's been pretty surprising how often things like phones or improperly utilized gateways can impact both the financials and the operational efficiency of an organization. Um, and it's not just about network resources either, right? With the right visibility, companies can protect themselves from, expensive events like international toll fraud. So jumping right into it, one of the big things that we've been seeing when talking to people in the UC space is how much their roles and responsibilities have changed in the past few years. Since the pandemic, it's rapidly kind of changed the way a lot of organizations are operating. We've seen a massive shift to a fully remote workforce. And if it's not 100% remote, then most places at the very least have adopted, a hybrid model of work from home and in office business. Of the people that I've talked to over the past few years, an overwhelming majority have been pretty open about their experiences with, an increase in their day-to-day workload. This might be from an increasing complexity of their networks, dealing with an increase in the number of soft phones due to work from home. Maybe it's a push to adopt a cloud calling solution, which is something we're seeing a lot of. All of this leads to, they're spending more time troubleshooting network issues, right? This is a pretty obvious outcome, of more complex environments and hybrid models, figuring out what might be causing a network outage or where your traffic's coming from, call routing issues, trying to pinpoint the cause of a high number of abandoned calls. All of these things are just taking more time. So one of the real big takeaways I usually get from these conversations is how I would say at least 90% of the people that I've worked with in the past will say that they can easily spend up to 8 hours a week either troubleshooting these issues or combing through the data manually to try to find that information they need. And that's really just from a network engineer's perspective. But if you talk to the IT managers and the C-suite level executives in this field, their main concerns over the last few years are typically, related to an increase in operational costs. If they're dealing with paying out higher wages, increased costs of doing business in other areas, due to inflation, supply chain issues, you name it. there's always a focus on cost savings. Companies are more cost conscious than ever these days. So if there's a pretty straightforward way to highlight areas where you can cut costs, it's definitely worth getting some visibility, or automating a process where you can to try to cut down on spend. So yeah, let's talk savings. Jumping into the math real quick. I mean, if we take an average voice over IP engineer salary and break it down hourly, let's say right here I have 109,000, and I'm pulling this number from ZipRecruiter, so your mileage may vary. If you're making less than that, maybe talk to your boss. But if they're spending 8 hours a week on reporting, that can really add up. And through the year, you're looking at like a cost of $22,000, where they could be doing other things, right? So that's, by cutting the hours these engineers are spending on reporting, frees these teams up, to focus on more important issues, right? Keeping the networks running and getting ahead of costly, outages that are really going to affect your bottom line. So the next use case, here's another one that's pretty basic, but it's something we're seeing more and more of due to the nature of hybrid work. With fewer and fewer people going into the office, a lot of organizations are running into an increased number of either underutilized devices or just completely unused. And it's not always due to a work from home environment. Sometimes it's just organizational changes and a lack of insight into their device needs. So some quick math on this one too. If the yearly cost for hardware and maintenance on a Cisco IP phone is $12 each, and you have something like 500 devices no longer in use, you could be paying upwards of $6,000 a year in unnecessary costs, right? So Vic, I'll kind of put you on the spot here a little bit. How long does it typically take you guys to be able to pull that data and highlight some of these unused devices?
Yeah, Kev, thanks. I mean, it's just a matter of a minute or two. Honestly, looking at those, the unused devices from that perspective it's a simple report. It's already pre-created with Verify. So you literally click run and select your date time range, and it's going to help identify all of the devices, whether it's soft phones, hard phones, anything like that within your organization that hasn't been used in that amount of time. So it's a great way to really help clean up your devices. But one of the things that you had mentioned that I wanted to emphasize is the numbers that you had thrown out with regards to an engineer. That's just one engineer. Most of the time there's more than one engineer that's doing this. Whether they're digging through data, whether they're trying to find what devices, maybe they're trying to add DNs, DIDs, but they're picking through lists of what's actually active, what's not. So that's usually multiple engineers that are involved with that type of process. So it adds up fast when you start kind of going through the data. And the other side of that is it's not always just the devices that aren't necessarily being used that way. It has a lot to do with what DNs are being used or what DNs are not being used. So it goes a lot further than just the one engineer being able to pick through this or what devices are not being used. It kind of flows from the top all the way down to the individual phones and extensions that are being used or not used as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't really think of there, Vic. In some cases, this can even influence cost savings outside of a telecom management perspective. There have been a few instances where organizations have been able to look at some of these dormant and underutilized devices, and actually use that information to make a decision on downsizing for office space for those areas. Obviously, the price of leasing office space is going to vary a good bit depending on location. But it is just another way that organizations have been able to cut costs with UC management. So yeah, with just some basic visibility into your network, knowing what's going on, what devices are getting used, you could really be saving, your organization a decent amount of money with just a few simple reports. Phil, I'll pass it over to you for the next one.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, let's get into underutilized gateways and capacity utilization. Tongue twister there. Like dormant phones, the move to the cloud in place of traditional networks has obviously changed a lot of traffic going through things like older PSTN trunks. In the past, you always wanted enough trunks to be able to handle your peak times to ensure lines were open for the Monday morning rush of calls, but more and more we're seeing an increase in the number of underutilized trunks. Again, that is due to the cloud calling platforms, but still happens with fully on-prem organizations who may just went through a restructure or downsized a good bit. So from a cost perspective, a monthly PSTN service can cost around $20 per line. And it can increase if you're looking for features like voicemail, call waiting, maybe long distance calling options. It's not exactly cheap, so it's definitely important to stay on top of your usage and have a clear understanding of what's needed and what isn't needed. So again, something we've seen plenty of in the real world. One specific instance was with a great customer of ours, Tri Health. It was almost the exact situation that I just mentioned due to lack of visibility into their network. They didn't know how many gateways were needed. And after looking into it with just a few simple capacity utilization reports, they were able to pinpoint some unneeded PRIs, and they save around $15,000 a year by doing that. Just a few simple capacity reports. Capacity can also highlight any issues with staffing. Being able to have an accurate overview of your call volume opens up opportunities to add or remove staffing as needed. So if you take a look at a simple report or graph like this, you can tell where your staffing needs are. So maybe peak call volumes are coming in on a Monday, and I also notice a high number of dropped or abandoned calls. And maybe too many of my customers are on hold. And on the flip side, maybe I'm overstaffed on Wednesdays. I'm not receiving the same level of call volumes and everything is getting handled just as needed. So you can take this information and reallocate staff rather than simply adding more staff and increasing your overall costs. So Vic, is this something you guys are seeing a lot of on the SE front?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. I mean, it's kind of a almost like a daily thing that we see, specifically a lot with the staffing. And to emphasize something that you had said just a second ago is when you mentioned Mondays. And as I said in the beginning, I've been doing this for a while. And one of the things that we used to see was Mondays were always the busiest days of the week. And as like you had said, on Mondays your call volume is high. But it's interesting, over the last couple of years, we've seen a real shift in that busy time and that busy day. And honestly, it's no longer Mondays we're seeing as the busiest days with a lot of our customers. It's actually starting to migrate to Tuesdays. So the thing is a lot of these customers, they don't have that data to really make those decisions. They're basing it off of a lot of, with, staff going, oh, we're super busy. And we've all been there. We've all been to that place where, hey, it's crazy. Everything's just nuts right now. But is it always like that? Is that the long-term effect? So, they're not really seeing the fact that, okay, yeah, it's busy right now on Tuesday or Monday or whatever day it may be, but is that your trend? So we've got a ton of people that start looking kind of the business analytics and start looking at how they're staffed and when their actual volumes come in. And the big shift has been is it's really not as much Mondays as it used to be. So people are getting the opportunity to now see some of those metrics, so they're able to rearrange their staff. People that you used to, and I've been there. You wanted to take a Monday off, but Mondays are crazy, and you got one other person out, so you can't do it. But now when people are able to put that data behind what's actually taking place, you're seeing that, hey, we've got an extra day. Monday is not as busy as it used to be. Let's just make sure everybody's here on Tuesday. So that putting that data behind those types of things is extremely valuable. And we see it all the time.
Yeah. Thanks, Vic.
Sounds like that 3-day weekend is coming.
That's what I'm shooting for.
All right, Kevin, tell us about some international toll fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so this next one, it can easily be one of the biggest expenses, or more accurately, probably one of the biggest revenue losses in the telecom industry, right? So imagine you're coming back from a long weekend, sit down at your desk with a coffee, you're looking through your calling expenses, and you're hit with a bill that's 10 times higher than what anything you're expecting. If you've ever seen this, it's probably a good chance you've been a victim of international toll fraud. right? It's kind of like leaving your car unlocked with the keys and letting somebody just take it for a joyride 100% at your expense. Um, if you're not familiar, here's just a quick breakdown, right? You've got your premium rate numbers. Those are the numbers where you call for something and there's a charge involved. Certain customer service lines have them. Voting on reality TV shows used to have them or other entertainment services. And, scammers will set these numbers up, but with the sole intent of kind of siphoning money out of organizations. So how do they get access? Most of the time, we see them gain access through unsecured or improperly configured systems. And once they're in, they can, make hundreds of calls to these numbers they've set up, which just racks up huge bills. Um, and what does it look like? Kind of like what I just mentioned, and maybe you've got a great telecom setup. You're running Cisco's Unity system, which is managing your voicemails and your call routing. But like I said, if it's not secure, scammers can sneak in and start using these outside lines to make calls, and you might not even notice it until you start receiving, these huge bills. Um, Fortunately, there are ways you can get in front of this and some things you can do to prevent it. Vic, can you just tell us about some of those methods you've used in the past and how you've helped some of these organizations?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. And I'll be honest, it is way more prevalent than most companies actually realize it's going on, and for several different reasons. So, some of the things that we do to help combat it, I'll talk about that first, and that's the ability to create alerts, alerting on international calls, alerting on toll fraud numbers, alerting on suspicious dialing patterns. So that's when one of those calls does go through, you get an alert, saying, hey, this is what's going on. We actually had a customer, University of Winnipeg, that they received some alerts from our system over the weekend, and they realized that it should not have been taking place over the weekend. And they reached out to their telecom carrier, and they were able to shut down a potential extremely expensive loss. And the only reason they even caught it was because Verify was sending alerts. Some of the other things we do is, scheduling reporting on a daily basis, or an hourly basis, or a weekly basis to help identify some of those odd calling scenarios, excessive calling scenarios that may be going on. But I think the number one thing people probably utilize is the dashboards. And just setting up a simple widget that really you could set up in just a matter of a couple minutes to help you identify potential toll fraud, suspicious inbound or outbound calling. That's something that's there. It's constantly running. It's constantly refreshing. Because one of the things you see is with toll fraud, there's several different factors that are really in play with it. It's not like one guy sitting at his desk trying to figure out a way through your phone system. It's all bots now. It's all automated. So you're going to see things like you got a couple thousand calls in 1 minute from the same telephone number, or attempting to go to the same telephone number, or they're attempting to go to your Unity system. Some ungodly amount of volume that starts to take place. Now, like you had mentioned, if they happen to get through, if you don't have a system in place that helps you identify that, well, you know what? They're not going to stop making those calls. Those calls are going to continue until it somehow gets shut down. Hopefully, your expense or your financial department catches the fact that they have a much larger bill than normal. But then it's too late. You're already fighting the charges. So these are bots that take place. I mean, I've gone into customers where, let's say their average call volume was, say, 20, 30,000 calls in a week, where they literally would have 1 million calls in a week. They weren't getting through. Luckily, through their system, they weren't getting through, but it was using resources in their environment. So not only does it really affect you if they actually are able to find an outside line and connect and make some of these fraudulent charges, but it also really impacts your phone system, because now, rather, what your system is set up for, your 5,000 users or your 10,000 users, you've got a bot going through trying to figure out a way outside of your phone system, and they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the amount of volume that you would normally have trying to get an outside line. So it really affects the system as a whole. But again, like you had said, if they get through, it could be quite costly.
Yeah, thank you, Vic. Just to kind of hammer home, your point there, just a little look at, some hypothetical savings. If we're looking at international calls, We'll say an average cost of around 4 minutes, and they're able to pump out 10,000 of these on a weekend when nobody's around. Organizations could be looking at a bill of 40,000 plus on the next billing cycle, before they even have visibility into the issue. And, if you think that number is high, the Communications Fraud Control Association, a nonprofit organization that monitors these kind of things, found that on average, the cost per fraud event was just that, $40,000. They also found that toll fraud losses in 2021 were over $9 billion, and that last year, losses from all forms of telecommunication fraud were estimated to be at around $38.95 billion. So it is a pretty serious problem. It's not getting any better at the moment. So it's definitely important to have some visibility and some preventative measures in place to be able to protect yourself against these events. So as you can see there, quite a few pretty simple ways, you can identify areas for cost savings, right? Whether that's through cleaning up unused devices, getting rid of unneeded gateways, increasing your operational efficiency by reallocating staff, to peak busy hours. And then, like I just mentioned, setting up prevention measures against common scams, all things that can really affect, your operating costs and your bottom line. And as Vic has mentioned, a lot of these solutions are quick fixes that can be implemented in just a few minutes. So it's really just about making sure you have the right visibility into your network and being able to run some of these pretty basic but absolutely essential reports. So that's all I have. With that, I'll pass it over to Phil, and we'll open it up to some Q&A.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Vic. Really insightful info here on those use cases and customer stories as well. Q&A. We do have 3 questions. For Vic, Jane asks, how can Verify help in determining the times in which devices from specific locations are used the most?
Okay, specific locations in there. Okay. So again, that's a pretty turnkey report that we have available. Location definition does come down to your phone system and how you're defining a location. We can use things like device pools to help identify locations in a lot of different customers. We can use departments or organizational structures. We've got some customers that use device descriptions, and they have location ID in their device descriptions, and they can isolate all their different locations. So there's several different ways to do that. It really comes down to kind of how the phone system is configured for you guys, but normally it's pretty easy for us to be able to figure something out for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Vic. Scott has a question. We are considering moving to WebEx calling from an older on-prem CUCM version. Can Verify help at all with the move to cloud calling?
Yes, Scott, absolutely. So we do have a migration offering. That is one of our offerings. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out. Essentially what that does is it's going to help you kind of really coordinate your migration. What sites are your busiest? As somebody asked, what locations are being used? Being able to identify those locations, those sites, what devices are being used? As Kevin had talked about earlier, understanding, what devices, what extensions, what users, especially if you're talking about going to WebEx, understanding what users are actually using their phones is important, because you don't want to pay for a bunch of license that you don't really need. So we do have a migration offering that's going to allow you an opportunity to use Verify, incorporate both your Cisco on-prem system as well as your WebEx system, and then run some very basic reports. And when I say run, they're pretty much click and run to understand what is your actual usage. How many phones do you actually have in your environment versus how many phones you're actually using in your environment? What sites do we want to cut over? We get a lot of people that are actually trialing multiple web-based platforms, whether it's WebEx or Zoom or Teams, and they're trying to understand, okay, what site do I want to trial this with? I obviously don't want to bring over my busiest group and then stick them on a new system and hope for the best. And then what system do I stick them on? So they're using our system to really make educated, data-driven decisions on, okay, who should we start off with this? What users use the system the most? What users aren't using the system at all? When we start to talk about migrating that licensing over from your call manager to your device-based licensing over to your user-based licensing, really getting an understanding of, okay, what users do I actually have to migrate? Group calling, do I need it, or can I go with a contact center? Do I even need a contact center? So yeah, there's a lot we can do with the assistance for that migration. We've got a lot of customers taking advantage of that as well.
Great. One final question. Jim has a question. With so many services going to the cloud, does Verify also plan to push their solution to the cloud?
Good question. We do currently have a cloud offering. So we do host in GCP. So we can, if you want to go to the cloud, but we are in no way forcing our customers to go to the cloud. We have no intent of forcing our customers to go to the cloud. We've got a lot of customers that are perfectly content, with their call managers on-prem, leaving their analytics on-prem as well. We can support both, but yeah, to answer that, there's no force of the hand. We'll put it that way.
Awesome. I want to thank everybody for joining. Please visit verify.com/essential to get the white paper version of this presentation, PDF download. If you're interested in learning more, don't hesitate to reach out to Kevin, Vic, or myself. It's Kevin, Victor, or Phil at verify.com. We'll be happy to help you learn more about getting more insight into your UC environment and things like you saw today in this webinar. So on behalf of all of us here at Verify, have a great day, and we will see you next month. Thank you.
I think so.
Thanks, everybody.